Slave Aspire, Hades, and Vampire Survivors are three awesome indie games that exploded out of obscurity and went on to define their genres. And wouldn't it be awesome if you got to say that you played them before they were cool? In short, indie games are awesome, I love finding new ones, and I'm always on the lookout for that next really big hit. But Steam Next can be rather overwhelming. There's so many demos, so many games, there's too much to ever play. So this time, I made a wheel to pick for me. I spin the wheel and play any game on the list that comes up. But after a couple spins, and maybe because I was watching an Iron Pineapple video in the background, I realized I kept landing on more obscure titles. So I took a little inspiration from his approach, and I played 10 indie games you might not have heard of. And so that intro out of the way, let's get into it by spinning the wheel and going into game number 1. Upon loading up another farm roguelike Rebirth, I wasn't really sure what to expect. After all, the game looks like a very cute, fun little Stardew Valley. But after playing it a bit, I realized it probably has more in common with Balatro than Stardew Valley, because this is very much a management-focused roguelike where you need to optimize your resources, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to pay rent at the end of a week. And I have to say, I really like this, because when it comes to farming sims or games like Stardew Valley, they often don't hook me. I feel like I'm just kind of aimlessly wandering around, hoping I don't piss off the villagers because I forgot their birthday. But here, I had a well-defined goal. The first week's rent is $2,500. I needed to make $2,500 in my first week, and the second week's rent is $45,000, which I believe is about what the average American family pays, so it feels pretty realistic. To do this, you're going to need to build your farm up. But there's a lot more to the game. For example, right off the start, you have to select from 6 daily modifiers and assign each one to one of the days of a week, with the final day kind of being a free space. 3 of them are positive, 3 of them are negative. Yes, you have to pick 3 positive and 3 negative, but this gives you an opportunity to play around the negative modifiers. So, for example, if you pick a negative modifier that penalizes you for breaking rocks, don't break rocks that day. Till some soil, harvest some plants, build a bunch of stuff, or just go fishing. On the other hand, if you picked a positive modifier that gives you a bonus for selling your crops, that's the day where you want to sell everything. It also probably means you want to put that bonus for selling your crops towards the end of a week when you have a lot more produce you've built up, rather than the beginning when you probably don't have very much at all. And so after assigning the modifiers, you load into this wonderful wilderness with lots of trees, bushes, rocks, and exactly no beautiful fields to farm in. Clearing the land is energy intensive, so you're not going to be able to set up your farm fully in one day. Remember, you have a whole week, play tactically. Personally, I did like setting up at least a 3x3 with a scarecrow. This way, the scarecrow prevents birds from landing and eating all my seeds, and I'm able to generate a little bit of money so that I can buy more seeds over time, or put that produce into a seed maker and then plant a full field a couple days later after I've managed to clear more. As your farm grows, you can add more stuff to it. For example, beehives increase the growth rate while providing honey that you can use in crafting or alchemy. And you could use fertilizer if you want to grow some of your plants a little faster, or set up a sprinkler so you don't have to do any pesky watering anymore. Just remember, sell all of your produce on a bonus day if you want to maximize your profits. And honestly, for a small indie game demo, that would have been enough, but there is way more to another farm than just farming. And honestly, for a small indie game demo, that would have been enough. But yet, there are even more systems to interact with. For example, you can catch fish. Just look for bubbling water patches for a greater yield, or place fish traps. These cost some wood and some energy to set up, but provide a nice passive daily income provided you bait them with worms. Now, because the demo was a little bit limited, I didn't spend as much time getting into the more advanced options, but you can raise animals, and then of course harvest them for things like eggs and meat. You can participate in alchemy, brewing up potions, and then I'm assuming selling them for high profits, or you can even cook full meals. One thing I did notice is the more processed an item is, first of all, it's harder, because very often you'll have to take a raw resource and refine it at a building, then use that to build another building which refines a second resource, but also, the higher the price of the end result. So much like Balatro, when you go after ever-increasing bigger blinds, I suspect there's a mechanic where as you progress, you need to go for more and more refined produce in order to meet your rent. But so far, I've mostly talked about the farming elements. What about roguelike? Well, there's a little bit with the random perks, But also, as you do most tasks, you gain experience, and when leveling up, you pick from a variety of perks. Some of these weren't very impactful, but others were absolutely crazy, such as whenever you break a rock, you get random ores, including super valuable stuff like gems and diamonds. Or another time where I got a perk that upgraded my tools automatically, so I just turned like half of a land into one giant farm, because there was just a couple clicks to till it and water it. I played a few runs of a demo, and each time it felt surprisingly different due to the impact of the perks. Now, in addition to this, you also accumulate tool EXP. Once the bar fills, you can spend some materials to upgrade your tool to the next tier, or further specialize it. In general, the next tier means more coverage, less energy use, general efficiency stuff, whereas the specialize might mean something like you have a corn axe, or a fish pick that, yes, it gives you fish as you smash rocks with it, or a beetle hammer that inundates you with alchemy items as you build your houses. I like this approach because it encouraged me to try a lot of different things instead of just doing the same old strategy that works every single time. As you level up, you unlock more perks, so I think things could get even crazier in the full version of the game. So with all that said, what's the verdict? Well, I wasn't expecting very much from another farm, and I was pleasantly surprised. There's a really cool roguelike here with an addicting gameplay loop. I enjoyed having the goal to push me forwards, and I never realized that a farming roguelike could have so many different builds. Plus, the part of me that loves city builders and management was going, oh yes, you can make this more efficient. You can so make this more efficient. Which is also why, even though I kind of sort of saw all the content in just 2 runs, I played like 5. So in short, if you enjoy roguelikes or management sims, I recommend Another Farm Roguelike Rebirth. When it comes to looking through Steam Next demos, there's basically 2 guaranteed ways to get me to click your demo. But first, if your demo is related to a game that I already play and like. Second, if it has a unique enough art style that it stands out. And this is exactly why I added Inkborn to my list. Because Inkborn is a roguelike deck builder with an origami art style. And I have to say, the theming here is impeccable. Everything is related to books, quotes from authors, pen and paper, ink. Even when you're attacking and damaging enemies, they don't bleed, since they're made of paper after all, but ink blots and stains slowly rise to the surface, showing that the enemy is bloodied and its health has been lowered. But a cool art style doesn't necessarily a game make, and what really set Inkborn apart for me is its combo system. Each of your cards have different attributes denoted by the symbol below their cost. So, for example, the Tome card is defensive, and if you use Tome, 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 you trigger the first Tome, giving you 5 block and increasing the block you gain by 1. Then, you could either use a completely unrelated attack, use another Tome to trigger second Tome, a separate combo, that increases the block you gain by another +5, 6 total, or use a completely different offensive combo by using, say, a Brawl attack, dealing damage to an enemy and inflicting them with a negative status. This changes the gameplay by a lot. I cannot stress how different my first run was to my second run, because on my first run, I wasn't really paying attention to the combo system, and I died about 3/4 of the way through because I got overwhelmed by enemies. But on my second run, I paid attention. I was actually reading all the keywords. I was using consumables, and I was training combos. The end result? I had a deck that gave me sharpness. Sharpness increases the damage, so anything that hits a lot benefits from sharpness. So I'd buff my damage, then I'd combo it, unleashing massive DPS. Because yes, sharpness also buffs the damage done by your combos. It was really fun to see everything come together, and also, it was great to get revenge as my deck absolutely burned through the boss's health. I still don't know how hard the final boss is because I've done several runs at this point. Every single time, by the time I get to the boss, I just completely destroy him. So on the one hand, the combat demo for Inkborn is a pretty limited vertical slice of gameplay. You don't get to see how things progress, you don't really get to see run-to-run meta progression, any of that. On the other hand, I love Slave Aspire, and this is basically paper origami Slave Aspire, but with a combo system providing a unique twist. In other words, it is exactly up my alley when finding an obscure indie game that I'm going to spend way too long playing. So I've already wishlisted Inkborn, and I very much look forward to playing it in the future, either when the early access comes out, or maybe even waiting for the 1.0 release. I'll have to see how much content the early access has to offer. Either way, it looks really cool. If you like roguelikes and deck builders, I 100% recommend you check out the demo if it's still up. And now it's back to the wheel and on to the next game. In a word, Wanderstop is a vibe. It's the type of game that you don't play through with the intent of beating. Instead, you experience it and see what the game has to offer. And so to set the scene, this is how the demo opens.
My name is Alta, and I am a fighter. When you're in a fight with someone, only one thing matters. Control. Are you in control or not? Because if you're not, here's what happens. You get hit. Hard. You feel scared. You submit. But if you do the work, if you put in the hours, if you give yourself no excuses, then you take back control. That feeling right there. The moment when you realize that your pain does not have to be an impediment, that it can be what drives you. That's the reason why I became a fighter. It's why I pushed myself harder than anybody I have ever known. I trained like my life depended on it. I did the time. I put in the work. And so, to this day, I have not lost a fight in 3.5 years. Undefeated for that long. God, it took everything, but I earned it. This is what I devoted my entire life to. Finally, I'm here. I made it. I can... I lost? How? No. I must have gotten sloppy, complacent. I must have slacked on my training. I'm so stupid! But I can use this failure to push myself even harder. Train myself back up better than ever. Right. Maybe the loss was actually a lesson I needed. Once I've made it back to the top, I'll never allow... Again. I'm a failure. I'm weak. I'm a failure. I'm a failure. A failure.
I don't deserve it.
I don't deserve it. I don't want to be this person. No. Snap out of it, Alta. Do not go to that place again. Take responsibility. This can be fixed. Only one person in the world is good enough to train me back up. Master Winters. She was an unrivaled fighter in her time. A god. She'll know what to do. Her home lies deep within a forest, at the edge of the world. I'll find her no matter what it takes. I'll do whatever she demands of me. And when I leave this place, it will be on nobody's terms, but mine.
After that intense introduction, you find Alta running through the forest. But there's an inevitability here. No matter how hard you try to push forward, eventually Alta will collapse. At which point, you're introduced to Boro, the kind owner of a Wanderstop tea shop. He asks Alta for some help in making tea, and you are of course free to choose yes or no. This happens several times throughout the demo. Though there does seem to be yet another inevitability here. No matter how many times you say no matter how many times the game sets you loose to wander, eventually you are going to help Boro make tea. Because after all, what else is there to do at the Wanderstop? And so Alta goes about learning this new profession, whether it's gathering tea leaves, growing and hybridizing crops, or making the tea itself. All of these things are simple enough. And the gameplay is frequently interspersed with long conversations between Boro and Alta, building both of the characters up while offering you plenty of opportunities to be interactive and, in some cases, maybe even a little bit rude. Now, even before the demo, I was looking forward to Wanderstop. After I saw the first trailer, the concept of running a tea shop, looking into someone's potentially dark past, and just taking things a little bit slower intrigued me. And as someone who very often needs a goal to drive me forward in games, whether it's the narrative, learning more about the characters, the combat system making numbers go bigger, just something to latch onto, I find the open-ended nature of Wanderstop to be interesting. Will it be for me? Will I lose interest? I don't know. But the demo has me intrigued, and I'm definitely going to be checking this one out in the future. Drop Duchy is a sort of game that makes its themes obvious from the title. You drop tiles down, aka Tetris, and you make a duchy. Sort of. This is more hinting at the synergies in the roguelike deck builder nature of the game, which reminded me a lot of Loop Hero, another game that was really focused on building up a kingdom through synergies and used cards to represent its mechanics. And so when you start playing, you've got a bunch of tiles, you can rotate them, and you want to complete entire rows exactly like in Tetris. Now in Tetris, when you complete a row, it's deleted and the board stays clear so you can keep playing. In Drop Duchy, when you complete a row, you get all the resources, which you can use to upgrade your cards or do a couple other things later. But here's where things get interesting, because you don't just have Tetris pieces. No, these are all terrain types and buildings. So a forest is different from a field. A field can be planted if it's adjacent to a farm, turning it into beautiful farmland filled with golden wheat. On the other hand, if you have a bunch of forests, you might want to drop down a ranger building. Because as we all know, forests naturally contain rangers, and if you give them a home, they'll come out of a forest and fight for your side. You might even get a band of merry men. In some cases, though, synergies are not a good thing, because some tiles contain hostile buildings. These have a garrison, which might be increased by synergy bonuses, so you'll actually want to do the anti-synergy. Plop that ranger's hut dead center in a field, with a watchtower in a forest where those archers can't see anything. That way, you are able to maximize your own benefits and minimize the benefits to your enemy. Now, in addition to combat encounters, there are a few other things that you do as you progress. For example, you could have a peaceful encounter. These are nice, chill, you focus on building, gathering resources, but keep in mind, outside of a very first peaceful encounter at the start of each round, if you take the peaceful option, it will make the boss harder. Guild halls award you with one free card. Markets, on the other hand, allow you to exchange resources. And sometimes you come across resource depots that just give you a bunch of free stuff. You can even sacrifice health to take even more stuff. Don't think too hard about that. You're definitely not committing murder and robbery. And so you play through, following a path kind of like Slay the Spire, and at the end is a boss round. Basically, if there's a wall, your play space is extremely restricted, and your goal is to place your pieces efficiently so that you can push the wall up and up and up and up until the massive garrison bonus that's meant to penalize you and punish you for being impatient dissipates, and then you can finally take on the wall and hopefully win. So in terms of a Drop Duchy gameplay, it looks like you are playing Tetris. Again, realistically, what you're paying far more attention to are those synergies. At the start of the tutorial, there are two biome types, fields and forests. But as you continue playing and gain access to other factions, you'll also unlock river and city. Different economic and military buildings synergize with each. A watchtower synergizes with fields, whereas a forest, again, you want a ranger's hut or maybe a lumber gatherer to get all sorts of extra resources by stacking up a big old forest on the side of your map. And it looks like the released version of the game is going to have even more content, more terrain types, more factions to play, all that fun stuff. Personally, I found it a bit hard to use rivers in the demo and cards that synergize with them, because they just weren't very consistent, especially if you didn't have a card that forced rivers to spawn in your deck. On the other hand, building around forest synergies, city synergies, or field synergies was pretty easy. Forest and field are both very common biomes, and city synergies are specific to one faction, which gives you a lot of city synergy bonuses, including a very powerful unique building. But okay, after you placed all your tiles, or reach the top of a play space because you've been sloppy, you enter the combat phase. This is quite simple. Think of it as rock, paper, scissors. Archers beat axes, axes beat swords, swords beat archers. But order is important, because smaller groups of troops combine with larger groups of troops and convert all to one type. So, for example, let's say you have 3 archers and move them into a group of 10 swordsmen. You now have 13 swordsmen. If the enemy has, let's just say, 5 archers and 5 axemen, what you would probably want to do is move your 3 archers into the enemy axemen, where they're going to be most effective. Then move the enemy axemen into the enemy archers, where they also become archers, and go against your swordsmen who are effective against archers, thus maximizing the damage you deal. After the battle's over, you have the option to pick a new card, and then select the new tile and enter a new battle. Or, get free resources, do some shopping, all that fun extra stuff. Now, before you start the next combat round, you have the option to spend resources to either expand your deck size, which you should do if you have the cards that you want to add. Just keep in mind that you will play through the entire deck, so the randomness comes in the order in which you receive cards. And you can also spend those resources to upgrade cards. Now, this is one area where the demo was a bit limited. Very often I would upgrade a card from level 1 to level 2, then to go from 2 to 3 would require a resource that's just not in the demo like stone. But I did notice that the system was quite impactful. Because if a card had a range of 1 by default, upgrading it might increase the range to 2, and it can affect way more tiles. And upgrading the Belfry unique card was really cool because you get to pick from 3 different options and further specialize the card, and each time you upgrade it, you get even more options to pick from to further specialize it to fit your needs. Something I really like about Drop Duchy is individually, each of its mechanics are very simple. Placing tiles, kind of like Tetris. The synergies are simple enough. I mean, fields with fields, forests with forests, maybe put all your military buildings in a blob with a thing that buffs other military buildings. Easy enough. The deck building, look for synergies. The combat, rock, paper, scissors. But because it has so many of these systems going on, and uses the roguelike formula where healing is relatively difficult, you can spend gold to heal lost health, but you have 50 health and it costs 10 gold per, so it's going to be very expensive to get your health back if you lose a significant portion. So I feel like the simple parts make the game easy to understand, and the complex interactions between those simple parts keep you coming back, playing one more round, which is something that happened to me. I did quite a bit of grinding of a demo, I unlocked everything, and then I played several more rounds because I was having so much fun with the game. So I'm looking forward to seeing more of Drop Duchy with a full release. If you enjoyed Loop Hero, this one could very well be up your alley. Playing the demo for Boreas was pretty hard. The game's translation is very poor. The game itself, or at the very least its tutorial, does not do a good job of communicating what it wants you to do. For example, at the start you're told to hold E to interact. Okay, cool. Then you're given basic instructions on how to interact with the beak, which turns out to be the ship's dredging system. And then the seagull continues to teach you about the ship's basic functionality by giving obscure hints, and you have to kind of just walk around until you see the correct element highlighted in blue. Now, if this is supposed to be a mystery game where figuring things out on your own is the point, okay, but because the translation was so poor, I genuinely couldn't tell if this was intended or just a side effect of not translating words correctly. So how does the fishing work? Well, you align your ship's sails to the wind, basically line it up with the red marker, feed the furnace, though the game suggests planks, clothing, and oil, burnable stuff, and then you reel in your haul. But this gameplay loop did not grab me. It felt very bland and boring, in part because getting crates with icons isn't interesting. I would much rather get some weird fish, or if we're dredging up bits of shipwrecks, instead of a crate with just a shirt icon on it, why not dredge up shirts from the obscure metal band The Salty Dogs? Something with a unique icon that actually ties things back to the world. Oh, and one last thing for the NPC conversations, they just say blah blah repeatedly. And this sounds very stilted and robotic in a way that felt very uncanny valley for me. Here's a short example clip.
Blah blah.
Blah blah.
Blah blah.
So in short, Boreas did not grab me in any way. I think at a minimum, from the start, the developers need, number one, to let you re-keybind things. This is super huge, especially for accessibility. And number two, they need to have their tutorial be much clearer unless the point of the game is to figure stuff out through obscure clues. Something that it didn't really feel like was the case, as the rest of the game didn't have any of that. When it comes to the gameplay itself, it could just be the game is not for me. And if that's the case, it's fine. But everything I experienced was bland and generic. I would like something that is more interesting and stands out, such as you're dredging things up, if the weight is heavier, maybe the crank should go slower. Maybe, instead of trying to get it all the way to the end and then it just automatically is caught, you need to stop it in a red zone and hold it there for a certain amount of time. Something that makes you feel you're interacting with the game, and then use the world building to make you feel like you are getting something for your interaction. Again, I'd really love to see something beyond just really generic icons and crates for what you're pulling up from the bottom of the sea. There are so many interesting, cool, weird, and wacky things you can grab from the bottom of the ocean. And for an example of games that do this in a much better way, I suggest checking out either Dredge or Dave the Diver. All right, those are my thoughts, and with that said, on to the next one. Putting I Am Legion stand survivors on the wheel was a big mistake because it has eaten up way too much of my time. This is a bullet heaven game, taking inspiration from Vampire Survivors. However, it also puts a neat twist on the genre, because you don't equip weapons, instead, you equip stands. Think JoJo or Persona. They attack, they use abilities, and you can roll them, which means yes, much like with an auto battler, you have to build up your team of stands before you can take on the boss. So for the basic gameplay, you spawn in, your stands start attacking automatically, you can go near various breakable objects, the stands will attack it, breaking the treasure chest, opening ore, all that fun stuff, and of course, killing enemies. If you do all this, you're able to collect several of the game's progression resources. First and foremost of which is souls, because this is what you use to purchase stands. It costs 3 souls to purchase any stand, right now they all have the same price, and 1 soul to reroll the stands on offer. Also, if you don't have quite enough to purchase a stand that you want, you can always lock it and come back later. And if you're a high roller, you purchase all the stands, you'll get 4 new options, which is pretty good at the start of a game if you have a little meta progression and start with way more souls than stands appear. Because here's the thing, stands can be merged. So an example of a very simple merge would be you buy a random green stand and a second copy and you merge them, it is now a 2-star version. If you merge 2 2-stars, you get a 3-star. But stands also have symbiotic merges. These require you to usually get 2-star version of the stands and combine several of them together. For example, a 2-star wolf and a 2-star monkey gets you a Monkey King. And then if you combine Monkey King with a ninja, you get Sun Wukong. Each tier of stands is far more powerful and has more complex abilities. So a green stand, it's probably going to attack something. A blue stand, it's going to attack something. It may summon some allies, all sorts of fun stuff. And then a purple stand has all sorts of crazy effects like filling your screen with explosions, firing waves of projectiles, or maybe just summoning a giant spinning staff that hits everything on the screen. And so of course your goal, or at least my personal goal when playing, is to get as many of the purple stands as possible because they're really cool and also very effective. But the game does have a few other progression systems as well. For example, you can spend gold to unlock new rooms. This gives you access to more space to fight enemies, more treasure chests to open, anvils to spawn, ores to smash, basically more of everything. And if you break the eggs or monster nests, a whole bunch of monsters come out, which is bad because then more monsters are chasing you, but also good because you can kill those monsters and get EXP gems. Gold can also be used when smithing to reroll an item, randomizing it. Speaking of which, if you interact with an anvil, you can spend your ore to smith random items. Some of them have special properties. These are locked by default. This could be stat growth, cooldown recovery, gold drops, all sorts of powerful extra affixes. But an item's base affixes is defined by its type. So boots, for example, movement speed. Amulets and weapons increase your damage. Armor increases your defenses. Gloves help you pick up loot. Bracers give you attack speed. Oh, and jewelry gives you crit. Almost forgot that. Like with stands, you can merge 2 copies of an item to make one of an extra rarity, and higher level items have more stats, and in some cases, higher level items also have more complex stats. Last but not least, all the items you kill drop EXP gems, so pick those up to level up your character, increasing their health, and in some cases other stats depending on what growth affixes they have. So the basic gameplay loop, you're running around, your stands are breaking stuff, killing enemies, and you're trying to get all the progression currencies. This is one area that, especially when I first started playing the game, I did struggle with a bit, because the stands spawn around your character, and they're pretty darn distracting, especially when they're all firing off abilities. So quite often, I wouldn't see an enemy, I would run into the enemy, and I would take some damage. Luckily, if you stack a bunch of HP regen and get higher damage, most enemies that get near you will die anyway, and the bosses are well enough telegraphed that you don't have to worry too much about accidentally walking into their abilities. Also, movement speed boots, that helps a lot with this. And in comparison to a lot of bullet heaven games, the bosses put on a lot more pressure because when a boss spawns, you have 3 minutes and 30 seconds to kill it. Otherwise, you lose. You must do this by outputting enough DPS, or I should say building your stance so that they output enough DPS, while you position carefully to remain in range so that your stance can actually attack. Bosses during this time will attempt to attack you. In general, they use a mix of charges, close-range melee attacks, and long-range projectiles, all of which need to be avoided. Or maybe you just stack enough health regen that you can tank them and have even higher uptime on the boss for more damage. Personally, I found difficulty 1 to be pretty easy, but I struggled on both difficulty 2 and difficulty 3 before finally getting a really sweet win. Basically, the last 20 seconds, I was one hit away from dead, killed the final boss on difficulty 3, man, that felt good. But win or lose, between the runs you have meta progression, spending the green gems you picked up within a run to unlock talent points, and spending EXP to unlock other properties on your chosen character. Personally, I found the meta progression to be very lackluster. In terms of unlocking the different talent trees, it's fine I guess, but it's just boring percent stats and it was very slow and grindy. Now, increasing character properties was more interesting because at one point, for example, my character just gained the ability to start punching enemies, which is really cool. That's the sort of stuff I like to see. But again, it was very slow and very grindy to get enough EXP to actually make that possible. So if there's anything I'd like to see improved between the demo and the live version of the game, make the meta progression less of a grind, and also make some of the unlocks a little more interesting. But as for my overall thoughts, it's a really cool concept. I like the rolling and unit synergies of auto-battlers, but I don't like the, auto-battler part. And so this scratches that itch without the need to auto-battle. I also found that the progression systems come together nicely. Each of them puts just a little bit more pressure on you than you might otherwise have in a bullet heaven game. But none of them put so much pressure on you that it feels absolutely overwhelming. And the fact that the bosses had a DPS check really pushed me to actually learn how my stands worked and how to combine them to make an effective kit, which, P.S. it is basically just to get all the purple ones because the purple ones are super, super strong. Either way, I enjoyed Stand Survivors, and I look forward to seeing what the full version of the game has to offer. Now I know this title's a little less obscure than the other games I've covered so far, but in the grand scheme of things, I think it's niche enough to deserve an inclusion, especially because if you haven't played or heard of Monster Train before, you like roguelikes, you like deck builders, you might even like tower defense, this is very much worth your time. And I say this as someone who has over 100 hours in the original Monster Train. So yeah, I'm maybe a bit biased. I was super excited to see the demo announced. This time, an alliance has formed between Heaven and Hell, opening up all new angelic factions. I know if you haven't played the first one, that doesn't make any sense. Let me explain. In the original Monster Train, you played with different factions from Hell. So all sorts of different demons and monsters that all had to get together to fight against Heaven. Now you're doing that, and you have all the demons and the monsters, but you have dragons and angels too. So yeah, even more cool stuff to add to your army. Which also makes me wonder if the factions available in Monster Train 2 are going to be completely different from those in the base game. So let's go over the basics real quick. You have a champion. This is a superpowered unit that you get at the start of each round. And very often, this is the cornerstone of your deck or strategy. Your goal is to defend the Monster Train. It has 4 floors, enemies start at the bottom floor, and after each round, they move up 1 floor. At the very top floor is your pyre, the heart of your train. If this gets extinguished, you lose, game over. So you position your units kind of like towers. You cast spells to buff them, hinder enemies, kill enemies, all that fun stuff. Then combat plays out, enemies move to the next floor. Enemies do not fight your units until one or the other is dead. They each just get 1 attack, the exception being bosses. For boss waves, they do fight to the death. So in some cases, you'll want to really set that big juicy wave near the top, and in other cases, you'll want to set that near the bottom because the game rewards you for killing the boss early. Then after combat, you have a little bit of an interlude. During this time, you get new cards. This can be from either your deck's primary or secondary faction, and each faction has its own mechanics. For example, the Angelic faction in the demo, very much focused on Valor. This buffs your unit, and if the unit is on the front line, gives it armor. On the other hand, the Dragon faction, well, it's a dragon. It's focused on greed, and you can even build up a horde of draconic loot that gives you massive rewards when it reaches 8 stacks. When it can apply this sticky fire goose stuff that increases damage enemies take, which is pretty neat. But anyway, you get to the interlude. During the interlude, you can buy new cards, you can upgrade cards. All of your units and all of your spells have these enhancement slots, which is one of the coolest things about the original Monster Train. The enhancement slots Could be just basic stuff, more health, more damage, spells cost less. It can also be insane stuff like when your unit dies, it goes to the top of your deck, or when you play your spell, it is instead duplicated, and now you get to play the second one as well, assuming you have enough energy. After that, you go into the next fight. Repeat until you get to a boss wave, defeat the boss, claim a powerful artifact, rinse and repeat until you reach the end of a run. But there are a couple ways in which Monster Train 2 evolves the gameplay formula. First up, equipment cards are much more prominent. Each unit can have one piece of equipment. You have to do this during the gameplay, so you'll play out your champion, you'll equip it. After you beat that encounter and move on to the next one, your champion will not have the equipment. It goes back to just being a card in your deck that needs to be played and re-equipped. And the different pieces of equipment have really powerful effects, such as giving a unit haste so it strikes before the enemies. Typically, enemies strike before your units, meaning you're always fighting on the back foot. You can also get all sorts of very fun bonuses when your unit kills an enemy while wielding certain equipment. Another big part of the demo that I wasn't expecting is active abilities. Plenty of units have them, and they can be devastating. So Fel, your champion, can have the Savior ability, which moves Fel to the very front row, and gives Fel armor based on Fel's Valor. Valor's a stat that if a unit is in the front row, they gain armor at the end of a turn, and they also gain attack per Valor, essentially rewarding aggression. But if you upgrade Fel's Savior path, then Fel gives all that armor to allies, turning your entire floor into a massive line of tanks that the enemy's probably not going to be getting past, or at the very least the boss is not going to be getting past. And there's plenty more active abilities, like one of the dragons has a big old fire breath that can wipe out an entire floor of invaders. The gameplay in Monster Train already feels more active in most roguelike deck builders, but this really takes it to the next level, and I was paying so much attention that I almost forgot this game was turn-based. In other words, if you like the concept of something like Monster Train, but you don't really like turn-based games, I think you're going to find this way more engaging than the traditional offering. So, from everything I've seen of the demo, this is Monster Train, but more. The mechanics feel way more refined. In between rounds, you have lots of options as to where you're allocating your resources. It took me a couple runs to figure things out, but I very quickly went from dying to the first boss to killing bosses before the fight with them officially starts, because yes, that is a thing you can do in Monster Train. I also had pretty much infinite gold and tons of artifacts, because I had a card named Dante. For every negative effect in your deck, he gains an additional attack. I then gave him Avarice. So, when he attacks, he gains gold, or I should say, I gain gold, which I can use to purchase all sorts of other fun stuff. Also, I put on an equipment piece that when Dante, who is attacking constantly and generating gold for me constantly, kills an enemy, he then obtains loot that goes into the dragon's hoard. Because he was attacking like 10 plus times and absolutely melting through stuff, he would kill pretty much everything. So, way more loot equals more artifacts and more gold equals stronger deck. And before I knew it, I was chewing through bosses, completely destroying everything. It was awesome. So yeah, out of everything so far, I've really enjoyed Monster Train 2, looking forward to the full release, and if you don't check out anything else after watching this video, please go check out the demo for Monster Train 2 if it is still available. The Lone Soul demo drops you into the action immediately, as do most roguelikes, introducing you to the game's basic combat. In short, you have a melee attack that is most effective against enemies with purple health bars, and also is just really effective in general because it's spammable. A ranged attack that is most effective against enemies with green health bars, but it costs mana so you can't spam it too much, and the ability to combo them together, so you might do something like melee ranged, and you get an additional effect. Many of these inflict crowd control, which is good because red enemies are vulnerable to crowd control. Each combat encounter has several different options. You could maybe survive for a certain amount of time, kill a certain number of enemies, and well, actually there aren't that many options, but it's a demo, so fair enough. And after that, you interact with various shops and fonts. So at shops, you can purchase new items, sell old items, break items down, upgrade the rarity of items, or socket runes into your items to enhance their stats. And occasionally you're offered a new blessing, basically a new power. These blessings are always assigned to a combo, so it might be something like melee attack plus ranged attack, and on the ranged attack, it triggers a special effect. Or maybe it's melee attack, melee attack, then instead of the last melee attack, there's an additional effect triggered by the skill. The blessings are based on the various elemental powers of our NPCs that you get to interact with. Fire, lightning. You've probably played a game like this before. The usual stuff you'd expect. Now, one area where Lone Soul absolutely excels is in the way it creates a sense of atmosphere through awesome voice acting. Here's just a little bit of a clip.
Commander Minos explicitly ordered us to wait for Arana and Sarana's arrival, and for the tower's stabilization.
Alright, stop whining. I'll just take a quick look around. Since you'll be watching anyway, you might as well help me navigate.
I know you can't sit still, but you're breaking orders.
If anything happens, I'll take the blame.
I understand your urgency, but the order was to wait at the base until I stabilized the connection, correct?
My apologies, Commander Bolt Whisper. I won't make that mistake again. I just couldn't sit still waiting for the mission to begin.
Mr. Ashcaller also apologized for this disobedience. Let me remind you, especially for a mission of this importance, we follow the protocol. We are dealing with an exceptionally unusual Chaos Tower, and I cannot allow anyone to come to harm. Please visit the Ironroot Sisters and Mr. Ashcaller, then report back to me on the stabilization of spells. I'll be waiting in my chamber.
Now, to be honest with you, I couldn't tell too much about the larger narrative. The demo's probably missing that context. Though it was very fun to watch the cocky and self-assured main character, who definitely didn't seem to take it too harshly even when he failed. The approach to storytelling here very much seems Hades-inspired, where you're going to learn more each time you do a run and as you observe the various character interactions. Now, unfortunately, the combat feels very muddy. Executing combos are not nearly as responsive as I would hope. And yeah, I checked, there's no Cheeto dust mucking up my controller. I don't even really like Cheetos. But in addition, it is hard to see when you hit an enemy, and kind of hard to see when you get hit by an enemy. The hit feedback is not great. Now, when an enemy hits you, there are red telegraph zones, so you have a pretty good idea when you stood in something. When you're hitting an enemy, especially with crowd control effects, unless they are dead center of the effect, sometimes it's a little bit hard to tell. Which means there are times where I'd back off, not realizing that I could have been more aggressive. Now, even though combat didn't feel very good, that's something I can certainly forgive in a demo, especially if in the main version of the game, it ends up getting cleaned up. And the final boss of the demo was quite exciting. It's the Avatar of Overwhelm. And oh man, with all the red circles and the ads and red circles from the ads, it was quite overwhelming. I spent so much time circling, looking for that one moment to finally unleash my damage, and it felt so good to take down the boss. In short, this is cool, I like the setting, and there's a lot of potential here. We're just going to have to see how the combat shapes up. But for now, I would say that Lone Soul is very much a game to keep an eye on. Next up we have Riff, a cute little tower defense game, where you play as a character, you need to defend your main tower from a bunch of shadow monsters, which are actually kind of adorable, and I feel a little bad killing them. But they're streaming out of a portal, and I have a tower, so yeah, sorry. Gotta defend myself here. As your towers defeat the monsters, you get more juice, which you use to build more towers and defeat more monsters, with later levels adding more complex mechanics like a little pet that shoots some monsters for you, and the ability to make generators. These attract monsters, but give you juice over time, thus meaning you can build, you guessed it, even more towers. Now, I found most of the levels within the demo easy to complete. I think that's because most of them serve as a way to introduce the player to their tools. For example, the level with sniper turrets has big tanky enemies who are best defeated with sniper turrets. But each level also has a challenge, and these required me to put in more effort and think about my strategy, because it meant, for example, revisiting that sniper level and doing it without building any of the sniper towers. In short, Riff is a nice, simple tower defense game. I enjoyed the demo, and it's exactly the sort of thing that I'd play in a couple sittings on a rainy weekend. Alright, bonus game time. No wheel here, just a game that I wanted to check out, Lunarium. This is another one where the art style grabbed me and the tag kept me hooked, specifically Souls-like. Because I did take some inspiration from Iron Pineapple when making this video, in talking about more obscure games, and you can't take inspiration from Iron Pineapple without including at least one Souls-like game in your video. So, after picking up Lunarium, one of the things I noticed very early on is the parry riposte mechanic felt surprisingly good. Parrying in games is so difficult to get right, and usually I find it's not worth trying because the opportunity cost is so high. I'm just going to miss the timing and lose half of my health bar. But here, I went out of my way to parry normal monsters, parry bosses, pretty much parry everything, because I could build up that stagger bar to deal massive damage, and I could actually pull the parries off. Though I'm sure it's going to get more punishing later, especially since the last boss of the demo was significantly harder to parry than the early bosses with longer and more complex attack chains. Speaking of, in Souls-like fashion, after confronting the first boss, you beat it easily, and then there's a scripted loss where you're introduced to the game's second main character. Because in Lunarium, you're fighting as a tag team. Ave attacks with her swordswomanship, and Lune provides with fire support, building up stagger bars on an enemy and enabling several of your combos. This made combat feel really good. It's simple enough that you don't get lost in endlessly trying to mix abilities between Ave and Lune. Ave attacks and can parry enemies. Lune provides damage from a distance, has a super effective attack when the enemy's stagger bar is full, and can fire a quick range shot, which you build up by attacking the enemy, which you can use to add stagger to that foe. But it was complex enough that you felt like you had a button for every situation, and I especially like how this played out during the rematch with the demo's first boss, which I'll now play so you can get a feel for it. But I stayed for the gameplay, because that was actually really solid. Though there are points where the game's dialogue gets a bit dry, especially because I was able to read much faster than the game presented it, and you couldn't skip it without skipping the conversation entirely. Also, there are a few points where the menus weren't fully translated, leaving me to guess on a couple things, but these are all issues that could easily be resolved for the release version of the game. With that said, while it was fun, and while the pairing did feel good, Lunarium didn't leave as strong of a first impression on me as some of the other games from this video, so I think there's a definite risk that this is going to end up going on my backlog, rather than something that I check out as soon as it releases. So, those are my thoughts after trying 10 indie games you probably haven't heard of. If any of the games I covered sounded interesting to you, do be sure to get subscribed and leave a like while you're down there. That is the best way to tell YouTube to show this video to more people, and that's the best way to show me that you want to see more stuff like this. Now, out of all the games I tried, I'd say my favorite is easily Monster Train 2, but I'm probably pretty biased there. I played the original for over 100 hours, and I could see myself putting the same amount of time into this sequel. But additionally, another farm grabbed me, dropped Duchy, puts a cool twist on the roguelike genre, turning Tetris into a roguelike. Stand Survivors takes the part of auto battlers I like, and drops it into a bullet heaven game. I'll definitely play Wanderstop for the story, and I'll probably be checking out Inkborn to craft the best origami decks to take on some paper tigers. It's been a lot of fun to play all the demos over the course of Steam Next, and because I had the wheel, I didn't get nearly as overwhelmed. In fact, I even found the energy to play a few other titles that weren't as obscure but were just on my list, like First Berserker Kazan. Though this isn't exactly the video to talk about that, so maybe check back for a future entry. So with that said, I'm curious, what were some of your favorite demos from Steam Next? Or just what are some cool indie games that you would recommend? Let me know down in the comments below. If you're looking for something else to watch, maybe check out some of my other indie game reviews. Those will be linked up in the card and down below. If not, thank you very much for watching to the end. I'm glad you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.